The Amber Mack Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Welcome to the Amber Mack Show. Well, we have been talking a lot about Canadian tech on the show, and we're going to do lots more of that in the future. But on today's episode, we also want to turn our attention to south of the border. We'll tell you the latest on AI regulation in the United States and what that might mean for the future of Canada. Also, I am out east for a few weeks shooting the show from beautiful Prince Edward Island. Jeff, it is good to be back for another episode after our Canadian tech special. And I do want to say that typically July is slow for tech news, but that is not the case this month so far.
No. Like we've said before, we've picked a good year to start a tech show because the amount of news is just an avalanche all the time. But yeah, it was super fun to do our Canadian tech special. If anyone hasn't seen that, you can go take a listen on our wherever you get podcasts or look at the videos on YouTube. But it was one of the fun things that I really enjoyed about that is hearing from our audience and having people do the voice messages and all that sort of stuff. So we're going to be doing more of that in the future for sure. And so speaking of big tech and news, Meta's added again with its AI chatbot features that it doesn't seem like many of us want. We'll also explain what a tech executive said to laid off employees about using AI to manage their emotions and unemployment. And in the other Mac, I'm going to talk about a strange situation where it seems like a new band on Spotify is AI, from the band to the pictures to the music and everything else. So we'll talk about that in the other Mac. But before we do that, let's get into this week's headlines that are shaping the future here in Canada and the rest of the world.
Newsfeed.
Well, we covered Trump's big, beautiful bill in a previous episode, and now it has passed, but not before they removed the section that was to ban states from regulating artificial intelligence for 10 years. This is a story, Jeff, that we reported on at length, and it is good to see that removed.
Absolutely. And, it's still a terrible bill. There's lots of just completely worthless stuff in it. And, in terms of a broken clock being right twice a day, Elon Musk's totally right that the spending part of that bill is out of control. But this AI stuff is very good to have it kiboshed. And, there is the principle behind, I think, trying to restrict states from passing laws is that there's a totally defensible reason to think that these kind of laws should be made at the national level. So there's not like a patchwork approach to AI regulation across different states. But realistically, this particular federal government is pretty unlikely to do a good job at that. So I'll take it. States like California and Colorado and some others are already beginning to adopt some AI-related laws. So we'll keep our eyes on where all that goes. And it's happening in a bunch of different, like I say, a bunch of different spaces where states where you can see laws coming in about deepfakes, about AI, about all this sort of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see it evolve.
I think it is unfortunate that we're not seeing more leadership at the federal level on AI regulation, because I think it does affect us here in Canada, because typically what we end up doing is following a lot of what the US does. Even though we have a new AI minister, I'm probably a little more skeptical about what we will actually do when it comes to regulation in the months and years ahead. I would say that is not something that is a core strength of ours based on some of our digital laws that have been created in the past, but not necessarily made it all the way through. So I'm a little bit skeptical about that.
And I think it's another example of where having, states go at it alone, or even having countries go at it alone, I don't think that's the right approach at all. I think this is something that, Canada needs to be doing stuff with the EU and ideally the states if we can. But this is a problem that we all need to kind of approach simultaneously with some kind of coherent set of principles that we're all following to make the best laws we can for, something that is going to absolutely transform our society. So I hope there's more cooperation on this in the future, and I hope Canada steps up to be part of that. But it's not really all about making laws inside your own country boundaries. We need to be making laws for the world in some sense as this stuff accelerates.
Absolutely. I mean, when it comes to the internet, clearly it does not care about our borders. So I
No.
think that is a really good point. Now, sticking with the topic of Canadian AI news, and as reported by last week's guest on the Amber Mac show, Murad Hamadi reported in The Logic that NVIDIA, one of the world's most valuable companies, is buying a Toronto based company. The startup is called CentML, and it's a machine learning company. And this is huge news for Canada.
Absolutely, it's a very big deal. It's looking like the total value of the deal is above like 400 million US dollars, something like that. And this follows NVIDIA has been making acquisitions like mad for the past 18 months, and they've been trying to build out their cloud and other services. So we'll again see what they're doing, but they're obviously making some big moves here. Congratulations to CentML. That is a wonderful partner to be getting in this kind of takeover. And unfortunately, it can't all be good AI news. So let's do some not so good news, and you'll never guess where the not so good news comes from again. As Business Insider recently reported, it looks like Meta is training AI chatbots to be more proactive, including sending human users totally unprompted messages.
Oh boy. Oh boy. So, this is another example of Meta serving up things on the AI front that nobody wants. And,
Yeah.
it's also part of, I think, what we've seen Mark Zuckerberg try to do with the loneliness epidemic, which is a very real thing that many people are facing right now. He believes, and I think he's said this very clearly, that
Mhm.
AI chatbots can play a role here. And I think he thinks in many cases that people would prefer to speak to some of these AI chatbots. That I don't think is a widespread opinion, but something specific
No.
to someone who spends too much time in his own little world. And it's not like Meta is really focused anyway on really giving people what they want, because there's so many parts of Meta that are fundamentally broken that don't need this layer of AI slop on top of them.
Yeah, and you can see I've got a couple of the other Mac segments. One of them is just say no to Mark Zuckerberg's AI friends, and then I did the recent one a couple of weeks ago on AI slop. Those both touch on that, and it's just kind of out of touch. But Mark Zuckerberg is certainly not alone in the big tech world. In terms of being pretty deeply out of touch. And another example of this is recently an Xbox executive made the suggestion as Microsoft lays off over 9,000 employees, cancels big cuts to gaming industry stuff, and affecting an awful lot of people. The Xbox executive suggested that affected employees who are losing their job or whatever else should, quote, help reduce the emotional and cognitive load that comes with job loss by seeking help from AI chatbots. I just
Oh
don't
boy.
know where to start with that.
We should say that this executive has deleted the post where he did recommend that people who've lost work turn to AI. But I think it's a pretty tone deaf response. I'm guessing that he wanted to sincerely help people, but it just lacks that empathetic approach that I think we see so often among some of these big tech executives. And it's hard to believe that after so many years, they haven't figured out how to have more of a human touch. Now, I find more and more that there's a lack of leadership among some of these tech companies. Jeff, I can't think of a leader who really stands out as maybe being a good, sensible voice on the AI front. Are you seeing any out there?
Not really. Like you say, they're all racing so hard to chase this AI goal that they're really leaving a lot of things in the dust. And the first thing that seems to get overrun is any actual consideration for real human beings. So it's definitely frustrating, but the guy obviously saw that what he said is not exactly a good look for Xbox or him. So it's good that he took it down after some kickback. And there's in terms of leadership and questionable tech, another story from across the border is that the U.S. Transportation Security Administration is increasingly employing facial scans at airports. And although some foreign nationals may have to do that, may be forced to do it, the program is actually totally optional for travelers on domestic flights. Even though it may not appear to be, it absolutely is. And privacy experts recommend that you politely decline to participate, if at all possible, in those facial scans, because you typically do not have to do them, and you're given away information to an organization that is not super clear about what it wants to do with it. And in these days with the government, I think it's just better to not be handing them data willy-nilly if they aren't forcing you to give it to them.
Yes, and this is also going to lead to delays if you do say no to these facial scans. Because I was recently in an airport in the U.S. A few months ago, and they were doing facial scanning. It was very interesting for people who didn't want to do it. It backed up the line more and more. So I think,
Right.
unfortunately, the system is kind of designed for people to just haphazardly opt into some of this invasive technology versus giving them a legitimate way to opt out. And that's a perfect example of people not wanting to do this, but also not wanting to hold up the line. And there's really, no other great option, unfortunately.
Yeah, and Customs and Border Protection is also doing some facial scanning as well. And again, they there are things that they have some clarity on and things that they have no clarity on. So Customs and Border Protection is saying that for U.S. citizens, your photo will be stored for no longer than 12 hours after you've been verified. But there's no clarification around that for non-Americans. So again, it's I don't know. It's people are asking for so much information and not really being clear about what they want to do with it and how they're going to manage it. So it's best to be careful. Obviously, anyone out there, if you get in a situation with the TSA or Customs and Border Protection, you got to do what they say. But keep in mind that you do have some rights here, and it serves you well to know about them. And so if you don't have to give things to them and it's not going to cause a big issue, then it's probably good advice to not give it to them.
Yeah, I would actually really encourage people to look up what the laws are in your own country when you're going through border patrol, and then what rights you do have when you're traveling. Because one of the things that I realized when I was doing this search for myself is that once you walk onto U.S. soil as a Canadian citizen, you just don't have the same rights, of course, as American citizens. And that's where we see so many of these headlines recently, people getting caught up in some of these issues. In some cases, getting detained, and the list
Yeah.
of horrendous things goes on and on. So I think it's really important for people to look up and understand what they can and can't do. And I think, unfortunately, we've seen this in the tourism numbers and the amount of spending that has been reduced from Canadians traveling to the U.S. It impacts the U.S. on an economic front, and that number is in the billions and billions of dollars.
Yeah. And I'm absolutely have no plans on going to the States until Trump is out of office or these things get settled down. It's just not worth it for, as far as I'm concerned, not worth it to walk into a situation where somebody can kind of dictate laws that aren't fair. And you don't understand what's going to go on when you do go to cross the border. So people may have different opinions about that, but I am just going to stay out of it. And speaking of people being cagey, actually, there's a viral story recently that's through Reddit and some other places about a software engineer in India who was caught working for multiple startups simultaneously and very reluctant to admit that that was what was happening.
Yes, I saw the story as well. So his name is Soham Parekh, and he was working 3 to 4 full-time jobs at the same time. And even after being caught, he continued to deny that he wasn't doing his job. So I guess there's some basis for companies worrying about remote workers if we see stories like this out there in the wild. But Jeff, I want to say, and don't think this is a good first reaction, especially as a parent of a kid who will soon be going into the workforce. I was kind of impressed that he was able to work all those jobs.
Yeah, and he just would not, he would deny it right up to the end from what I read about it. One of the employers actually sent a picture of himself and a second employer, both companies for whom that Soham Parekh was working for, and they're like, "Hey, dude, you've been caught, right? We both know you're working for both of us," and he was still pushing back. So there's definitely there's something a little bit funny about it. I mean, it's not something you want to think of. Hopefully, that doesn't happen too often, but yeah, it is a tiny bit impressive. I will admit that as well. And anyway, people can do what they want with that sort of stuff. But let's end off on a more positive story, and this one a bit more on the science side. Researchers in North Carolina have are working on a small 3D printed device that can be implanted directly under your skin so that people with type 1 diabetes can produce their own insulin, which is the core issue if you've got type 1 diabetes, which lessens the need for regular injections and as intense dietary monitoring and stuff like that. So it seems like a very cool piece of tech that they're working on.
Very cool. This is amazing when we get into both medical tech and health tech. I think this is where AI and emerging tech really shines. There's so much happening in that space to be able to improve people's lives. And just some numbers that I know you were able to look up. It's so impressive to know that there's a couple of million people with type 1 diabetes between both our countries, Canada and the US. So that is a lot of lives affected. And it's been incredible to see over the years some of this new technology that has really been helping people that have diabetes. So this is one area that I think emerging tech really shines. And I think it's fair to say, Jeff, that when it comes to 3D printed devices, there hasn't been sort of that peak with 3D printing, whether it's in healthcare or beyond, that we've seen with other emerging technologies like AI. But there's sort of a steady incremental improvement with some of these 3D technologies, which I think is very impressive, from healthcare to even building homes.
Absolutely. A guy at my work was just telling me about how his friend had a 3D printer and he used it to print up a guitar. So there are some really cool things you can do, but obviously the most impressive ones are when you can help people. We covered a bunch of this in our Canadian Tech Special about all the wonderful Canadian tech inventions like the electric wheelchair and things like that. So when you see technology being used to help people who need it, that's pretty much what it's there for at its core usefulness, and it's why we both love tech so much.
Absolutely. I do want to say, too, that there was news this past week about Musk starting a new political party. Jeff is going to tackle that topic in the future because Musk is not the only tech leader, Jeff, who
No,
is getting into politics, right?
no. Sam Altman also says he's pretty much without a party, and I think there are some really interesting things. So I've done a bunch of research, but it's going to have to wait till next week because it's a pretty big topic. But yeah, I'll be talking about uh, basically how legitimate is Musk's claim that the States needs a third party? Is that something that would actually be useful in the States? And there are some just fascinating things that I learned about that. And just one little teaser one is that I think it's 1941, the guy who won the Nobel Prize in economics uh, specified 5 things that you need to have a voting system that is fair and useful. And then he proved that if you have more than three or more parties or people to vote for, that you in fact cannot satisfy all 5 of those. So there was a great video online about is democracy mathematically impossible? We'll touch on that and more in next week's The Other Mac. But this week I'm going to do something. Have you seen this story about the AI ban, Dan?
I didn't. I am super excited about that. So I don't want to give too much away because I know you're going to tackle this coming up in the other Mac about a band and music that is getting a lot of attention on Spotify, and both are likely 100% artificial intelligence. So let's hear more about that coming up in the other Mac.
The Other Mac.
You may have seen my recent segment of The Other Mac where I talk about AI slop, but little did I know that at the time the groundwork was being laid for one of the most unusual slop stories I've come across so far. You may have heard of the band The Velvet Sundown. No, not the Velvet Underground, which the name seems to be purposely evocative of, but the Velvet Sundown, and how in just a few weeks they amassed over 1 million listens on their 2 almost simultaneously released albums on Spotify. Now, some people thought this was kind of strange, given there is absolutely no record of the band ever having performed anywhere, and the band's images looked very much like they were AI generated. In fact, Rick Beato, one of the best musical follows on YouTube, by the way, he then analyzed their music and concluded that it was almost certainly all AI generated as well. Now, the band's social media accounts initially pushed back on these accusations, saying they were lazy and baseless. However, not long after that, a man using the pseudonym Andrew Frelin told Rolling Stone that he was behind the band and that he used Suno AI music software to create the music, and that the whole thing was what he called an art hoax. As a musician, I was not impressed, but I left it at that for the moment, until the Velvet Sundown social media accounts claimed that Andrew Frelin had absolutely nothing to do with the band and that his connection was the real hoax. And apparently they were right, as Frelin subsequently admitted that his involvement was just a social engineering experiment and that he did indeed have nothing at all to do with the band. At that point, under increasing scrutiny, the Velvet Sundown's account finally admitted that the band and their music is actually AI, or as they put it, quote, a synthetic music project guided by human creative direction and composed, voiced, and visualized with the support of artificial intelligence. I think support is doing a lot of hard work there. But anyway, now this is not the first time a musical act has been revealed to be AI-based, and it certainly won't be the last. But what are we to make of this kind of thing? I see 3 real big takeaways. 1, AI music is just not very good. You may not care about whether music is created by humans or AI, but take a listen to the Velvet Sundown, and you'll hear some very mediocre music with lyrics bordering on terrible. In other words, it's totally AI slop that serves no constructive purpose other than to drown out the efforts of hardworking human musicians, who, I have to note, are making this a bit easier on AI as they get listeners increasingly comfortable listening to heavily auto-tuned and time-quantized recordings. So maybe AI music will get better, but I sincerely do not know why anyone would want it to. 2, streaming services are too easily manipulated. Whether that's manipulation by people posing as artists or manipulations by the streaming platform itself, something Spotify in particular has been accused of many times, there's something wrong when an entirely fictional band making not very good music can get 1 million listens over several weeks. Whether that's the algorithm doing stupid things or the streaming companies doing shady things, the only thing I know for sure is it's definitely not good for music or for musicians. And 3, technology is being used as a tool to compromise trust. Whether intentionally or not, this insane story shows how easily technology can be used to misrepresent things. We start with an imaginary band launching 2 AI albums that its creators swore were not AI. Then we have an unrelated third party claiming to have been in charge of the whole thing and saying it was indeed AI. And then the band's representative getting upset that someone else would dare take credit for their efforts, but then ultimately admitting that the whole thing was, yes, it was AI. This yielded stories everywhere from the Rolling Stone to the CBC, all of which play right into the original creators' hands by drawing attention to their imaginary band, which substantially increases the listens, all of which influences the streaming algorithms to give them even more prominence, and this then rewards the fraudulent and, I expect, musically talentless original creator, while most human musicians continue to struggle to make ends meet. As a musician and composer, this is a terrible sign of where things will likely go in the future of music. But even just as a human being, the whole ordeal shows how truth-averse so many people in our society are, and I think that's the real danger. I'm the other Mac. Keep it honest out there.
Thanks, Jeff. Super interesting. And coming up next, we have an award-winning economist who is joining us to unpack what Canadians need to know and do in the face of new Trump tariff chaos.
The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
Canadians are facing economic anxiety and global uncertainty during President Trump's summer trade plans and tariff chaos. Still, in the face of this turbulence, patriotism here in Canada is surging. To better understand what this all means, CD Howe's award-winning economist Daniel Schwanen joined Amber in the studio to share more.
Weekly follows.
Daniel, Canadians are facing a lot of economic anxiety, uncertainty right now. What's going on across this country at this very moment in time?
Well, right now we're facing very serious threats, economic threats, from our main trading partner, the United States. And I think that consists of tariffs or even more existential threats, as Canadians have learned in the first few months of Mr. Trump's presidency. But the economic threat is the one we need to take very seriously. And I think it's worth remembering that Canadians, even before Mr. Trump was elected, we weren't doing so well either. So incomes were flat. And, at the CD Howe Institute, so we're a think tank, and our mission is to think of, ideas, look at what's going on, and think of ideas and how we can improve Canadian standard of living. And so we always put out some research and advice towards that mission. But the reality is we weren't doing so well. So we had a lot of work even before the election of Mr. Trump, even before the tariff threat. Investment in Canada wasn't doing so well, so that was hard. It was hard to create good jobs. Affordability was an issue, as we saw independently of what was going on in the United States, as we saw in the recent federal election campaign. So the reality is that Canadians' incomes after inflation have been really flat on average for 5 years. And that was before we were hit with this body blow to our trade. So our trade with the United States is 70% of our total trade. Trade is about a third of our total economy. So we're talking about a lot of jobs and a lot of dollars at risk for our economy. So that's what we're confronting right now. Our governments have been trying to work together, which is not necessarily often the case, to counter that blow and to react to it. And actually, that's one encouraging thing from this. It's like all of a sudden we're almost waking up, and we're trying to solve problems not just with respect to the United States, but what were our problems before, that if we solve them would help us meet this crisis better.
I think it's a really good point that people are mobilizing, people are taking action. I was reading that at CD Howe, you've launched the Trade Crisis Working Group. What exactly is that group doing right now?
So in a time of crisis, and things are shifting, and you can't always rely on what you've done in the past or past thinking. You need some fresh thinking to address the issue at hand. And that's why there's a crisis. And we formed this group, which is very multi-industry, multidisciplinary in terms of experts, and that really helps us understand in real time on the ground, almost literally, how is this crisis unfolding. So there's no point us sitting in our office or looking out the window and saying, well, this is how I think we're going to solve this. So we really need to understand what's going on the ground, and that's what this crisis working group, again, from different industries, goods, services, ports, railways, are how they are living this crisis. And out of those discussions, which are so essential at a time like this, we often emerge, surprising to me even, a consensus about how Canada should react, what we should do. And then, of course, our job is then to convey that consensus to decision makers, so that at least they know that after serious discussions and reflection, and some from a group that reflects a fair amount of the country's economy and different experts, from that group emerged some serious considerations for policymakers.
Let's talk about some of these potential actions, in particular when it comes to the United States. You alluded to this already. I think a lot of the anxiety that we're feeling right now, especially when it comes to trade, is due to what's happening south of the border. So what should Canada be doing?
So what's interesting is that in the early days of this crisis, it became really apparent, the broad outlines of what we need to do became really apparent, and a lot of the rest has been tweaking. So from strategy to now more tactics, if you see what I mean. So it became apparent now, in a sense that sounds obvious, but that was actually great to hear people in business say that, and various experts among our group. In a sense, it's obvious. So the first thing is, how do we make them feel the pain? Because what the United States is doing is also not good for the US economy. So Mr. Trump has been very fond of saying and repeating that he doesn't need anything for Canada. They don't need anything for Canada. We know that that's actually not true. They need a lot from us. And if they're not getting it, or if they're making it more expensive by imposing tariffs, that hurts the US economy. Now, the first reaction is, we're going to retaliate. This is how we hurt them. And a lot of people were reacting that way. Now it's a lot more tactical, a little bit of retaliation, a lot of patience. Why? Because in fact, our, let's call them our boots on the ground, are actually already active in the United States. It's the consumers that are paying the price. It's the businesses that can't import what they need unless they pay the higher cost of tariffs. So the tactics, if you like, become, well, we need to speak and reach out to that audience with our research that actually, helps their talking point, if you will, and try to influence the White House that way, as opposed to retaliating. So that's one thing. The other thing is obviously, well, okay, this is the end of, we were counting a lot on trade with the United States and on free and open trade with the United States. And we had dodged the bullet a little bit in 2017 during the first Trump presidency. We kept a trade agreement that was pretty good, and we thought he was going to keep it. So I think, let's face it, a lot of Canadian businesses were assuming that. And now that assumption is out the window. So there's two things then in reaction to that. One is, how do we diversify our trade? It's not easy. And the other one is, okay, well, can we go back to some of those issues that we had about kickstarting our own economy to begin with, and actually reinforce our own economy almost like from within? So we were hurt by our own decisions before, not quite realizing it. We had a good time exporting to the US, but now it's like, also, how do we strengthen our own economy with our own means, not just looking to the United States? And so those are some of the issues that the broad strategic outlines, if you will, that appeared very early in the discussions of this working group, and the rest has been refining tactics. For example, do we partner? How do we look upon the partnership with Mexico? As a plus in our discussion with the United States, or as a minus? And there were a lot of discussions about that, and we ended up saying it's a plus, because confronting the United States alone is pretty pretty daunting, and I think they're going to take us more seriously together than separately. For example,
what if we move to discussing trade beyond what's happening on this continent? What are some of the opportunities? And I think we're seeing that right now from the current federal government in terms of actually going out and making sure we have better relationships around the world and beyond just North America.
Yes, that's something I would say, that's an aspect, our international relations beyond the United States, that I think, frankly, has been a bit neglected. So we reached, and we have an agreement in place with the European Union, which is great, a trade agreement. Now one with Japan and other TPP countries. So great effort there. We need to do more in that respect. We couldn't reach an agreement with the UK. We're still talking to a major Asian bloc, which is the ASEAN countries, Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, and so on. So that's still evolving. But even though we sign these trade agreements, we need to sign more. with like-minded countries. So this is really important to realize that a lot of countries, in fact, like us, would like a more rules-based trading order as opposed to the destruction of the rules-based trading order that Mr. Trump is clearly aiming for. I think that that's fair. But a lot of us, the other 3/4 of the world, would actually like to maintain some order and some more open trade. So we have to work with those countries. I mentioned some of them, but we've also had difficulty taking advantage of these agreements. You know, and here you go back to the question is, are Canadians entrepreneurial enough, frankly? Do we commercialize? We have great inventions. Do we commercialize them well? Are we comfortable dealing with customers in different cultures? So all these things, I think we need to look at afresh. It's great that we have these trade agreements. We need more, but we also need to take better advantage of them.
Another thing we need to do a better job of is trade between the provinces. And I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of Canadians who are wondering, why hasn't this really happened yet? There was an agreement about 30 years ago. It seems still very slow moving. So what's happening on that front?
That's right. So I mentioned the angle of reinforcing our own economy from within. And I think we've had a couple of major problems there. One was getting major projects off the ground. That would help our exports and that would help create new jobs and bring more incomes to government, tax revenues. And the other one is, and it's somewhat related, is how do we work together to create a stronger, more unified national economy? And that gets to the question, of course, of interprovincial trade as such, not necessarily national projects, although they each have their regional dimension and we have quarrels over them along regional and provincial dimensions as well. But the question of how, if you're a business, how in Ontario, how are you going to sell more in Quebec or in Alberta? Why are there these barriers? So for example, if you're a construction company, and this is a sector where productivity is really hampered. So if we have a more productive construction sector, we can build faster, cheaper. So one barrier to a productive construction sector is when you're facing different rules in different provinces, the rules that apply to the construction sites, or even, what kind of first aid kit you can have, right? So if you move workers, they have to comply, or managers, they have to comply with different rules depending on the province. That doesn't make for a very, different construction codes across the country. That doesn't make for a very productive use of our construction sectors and our skilled workers in that sector. That's one example. And I have to say that is one sector where there's been a lot of progress in terms of these barriers. We're harmonizing a lot of, finally, after 30 years, we decide, hey, this is something that could really help us. And we're starting just this year to harmonize some of these rules among provinces. But another one that is very frustrating, another example of barriers are the ones concerning truck transportation. It's crazy. So 8 years ago, maybe I shouldn't use that word, but it's frustrating. So I think it was 8 years ago, finally, after trying to do it through different trade agreements, we had an agreement in internal trade in 1995, and then another agreement in 2007. So finally, in 2008, provincial and federal transport ministers, hooray, they got together in Winnipeg, and they agreed on what the barriers were, like 10 sets of barriers, very detailed, and that they would try to harmonize, the type of tires and wheel size for different trucks, right? Can they be harmonized across the country? That's one example. And they agreed on what they were, and they agreed to try to remove them. But here we are, 7 years later. This is so crucial for our economy, and that relates to our diversification agenda. If it's not north-south, we're going to have to be a lot better east-west in terms of transporting goods and so on. So now we're back at this and saying, oh, maybe that was really important. And now we're trying to do it. But so the length of time is really frustrating. But a lot of the barriers have been identified, the ones I mentioned, for example, and they're being I guess they're chiseling away at them. But now there's definitely a new sense of urgency, and you've seen a lot of a number of provinces saying, if it's good enough for Nova Scotia, it's good enough for Ontario. Let's just deal with it on that basis. That's sometimes too simplistic. And the federal government has just announced, for example, that, if it's good enough, if this inspection or that inspection for this or that good is good enough for a province, it's good enough for the federal government. So I think we're starting to find shortcuts now, whereas before we were just starting from the basis of, let's try to, we're all different and we have to try to maintain our differences because of this, because of that, because it helps our little sector. So now I think the momentum is finally towards more cooperation and more acceptance of each other's standards so that we can facilitate this trade.
Let's talk a bit more for our final question about this sense of urgency that I think we're all feeling right now. We have a window of opportunity. It feels in some ways like all of this chaos has kind of woken a giant, so to speak, and the potential is there. What happens if we let this opportunity slip through the cracks? What are you seeing from some of your research at CD Howe?
Well, already in the first Trump presidency, we published a study. We did a very detailed study by one of our fellow Dan Churiak that looked at, okay, what if the United States imposed a 10% tariff on everything from everywhere in the world? And the answer was, the implications were quite bleak for us. So we were looking at over time, there would be an immediate bigger shock than what would happen over time, because over time, we can rally our own economic capacities and provide what the U.S. is, a lot of what the U.S. is providing us now, but at a higher costs. So over time, we'd be looking at maybe a 2.5-3% decline, one-off in standards of living. So it's like those maybe 3% wage increases, if you're lucky, that you've had over a year. They're disappearing, overnight, essentially, and you can't get them back. So that's a big drop in standard of living for Canadians, and that's what we're facing if we can't get the United States to walk back the rhetoric. And the good news is they've been walking back a lot because it hurts them, as I mentioned. They realize that. I don't think they're interested in a collapsing world economy, which means also a decline of standards of living in the U.S., a lower number of jobs, et cetera. I don't think they're interested in that. So that means eventually they have to work with partners like us, but it also means that the partners have to be ready to work with them. They're concerned about their trade deficit. They're concerned about the U.S. industrial base. They're concerned about defense and security. And the reason you see all these questions, Canada or the Canadian governments, proactively trying to answer those concerns on the part of the United States is because that's what's going to get us, if we're able to do that, to a better deal that will avoid this pretty catastrophic scenario that we're facing otherwise.
How optimistic are you that we are going to seize this moment?
That depends on the week. So I think right now I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic because there are teams actually talking to each other, and as we'll note in a paper that we'll release next week, the teams are below the political level. They're like the technocrats. They understand the issues. Okay, what's the mandate? More secure border. Let's work on that. What's the mandate? Try to help the U.S. reduce its trade balance while still having a thriving trade relationship. Let's work on that, right? So I think that we're there. The U.S. is negotiating at least framework agreements with a large number of countries under a fairly artificial deadline, as some of these things are of July 9. I think we're one of those countries, and we have a lot to offer to them. And so I think it's our chance to get in there and saying this is how we can improve the relationship with a new deal. That's going to be not just a trade deal, a broader trade and security deal that will respond to some of your concerns, and within that, we can operate with freer trade than what you're proposing right now, and hopefully as free as we had before the crisis erupted.
Daniel, thank you so much for joining me today. For people who want more information, where is the best place for them to go?
Well, the best place to start is our website, cdhow.org, and you can find all of our work there, hopefully giving practical advice to governments on how to raise standards of living for Canadians by improving policies in a range of areas that we work on: housing, inflation, energy, and of course trade. And we welcome feedback, but hopefully you'll find the ideas interesting, but we're always open to examine better ones.
Excellent. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
Thank you, CD Howe, for supporting the Amber Mac Show. Coming up next, your voicemails about Canadian tech milestones and moments.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.
This summer on the Amber Mac Show, we're going to do a couple fun segments on great tech-related entertainment, and we'd like you to help us. Just go to speakpipe.com/The Amber Mac Show. That's speakpipe.com/The Amber Mac Show, and tell us what your favorite technology-related television series or movies are. And you could be part of an upcoming episode. Ideally, let us know your name, where you're from, and then the title of one or more tech-oriented movies or TV shows that you love, and let us know why. We're looking at a very broad tent in terms of what tech means here, so don't worry too much if you're not sure whether your faves strictly qualify as technology-related. We'd love to hear from you anyway. So leave us a message at speakpipe.com/The Amber Mac Show. We can't wait to hear from you, and thanks so much for supporting our show. Thanks for listening to this week's show. Remember, you can watch our featured segments on our YouTube channel at Amber Mac. And speaking of YouTube, here's a comment from our Canadian Tech Special about the top 10 Canadian tech inventions. Scott Goldie had this to say, and I quote, "One thing I was surprised to know is the landing gear legs for the Apollo lunar modules, including the one used on Apollo 11, were manufactured in Canada by Aero DevTech, formerly Aero Machine Parts Limited, in Longueuil, Quebec. Way to go," end quote. Scott, thanks for that. That's awesome. We love hearing from you guys, and we're going to have more opportunities for listeners and viewers to leave messages like that, whether it's text or voice. So please keep them coming. We love to feature you on the show. And remember, you can get our Canadian Tech Special wherever you get your podcasts. Also, if you have an idea for a segment or a guest for the show, you can find me at Jeff MacArthur on X and on Blue Sky, and Amber on the same platforms at Amber Mac. So before we wrap up today, Amber has more of your feedback on the show, including why staying in Canada to build a world-class tech company is getting easier than ever.
Yes, just to follow up what Jeff said, thank you so much for sharing your feedback with us. We love doing our Canadian Tech Special. It was such a great show talking about the best in tech. We fit in pretty much all of the voicemails that came in, but we're still getting a few that have been sent in on SpeakPipe. So I wanted to share those with you. First up, we have one from Nathan.
Hey, Nathan Drescher, tech journalist here. What makes me most proud of Canadian tech is our incredible talent, the people who are behind it and who get the work done and who basically were, for until now, leaving to the US to work, but now I think that they are coming back. This is Canada's moment, and I couldn't be prouder. Cheers.
Doug also sent us a message, so thank you, Doug, for taking the time, and here is Doug's message.
Hi, Amber. It's Doug Anweller from Bellwood Strategy. I wanted to say how proud I am of the Canadian tech sector and thank you for the incredible work you do to promote it to the world. As a nation of great storytellers, I think we can do more to tell our tech stories and celebrate our achievements. I hope that your new Gander platform could be another avenue to do that. Thank you again for all you do.
Please do keep all of these voicemails coming to the show. We're going to make it easier as the weeks and months continue ahead for all of you to be able to send us your feedback for the show so that we can include it, your perspectives on technology, artificial intelligence, and all of the topics that we cover on the show. As Jeff mentioned, you can always find us on social media across all of the main platforms. Thank you so much for your support. This is the first summer of the Amber Max Show, and we have lots in store ahead. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Audio and video are great, but if you're looking for the most interesting tech stories and more in good old-fashioned text format, then you need to subscribe to our free Amber Mac weekly newsletter. Just go to ambermac.com/newsletter to sign up, and you'll get the latest tech news directly to your inbox every Tuesday morning. That's ambermac.com/newsletter. We're looking forward to seeing you there.
Long-standing alliances are under pressure, new tariffs are being introduced, and businesses are finding it harder to plan for the future. With our largest trading partner taking a more unpredictable approach, and given our dim economic performance of recent years, Canada faces a critical question. How do we safeguard our prosperity and economic sovereignty in this new world? The C.D. Howe Institute is leading the charge with a trade crisis working group to guide Canada through today's disruptions with real, actionable solutions. That starts with a strategic approach to U.S. demands and to USMCA renewal. Canada must secure its economic ties with the United States by asserting our independence and demonstrating that trade disruptions hurt both sides in a cross-border dispute. We should limit retaliatory tariffs to where they hit hardest, while ensuring Canadian industries still get the inputs they need. Our research also proposes a modern auto pact, one that rewards automakers for building here while protecting our duty-free access. But Canada can't put all its eggs in one basket. It needs to de-risk its relationships. Diversifying global trade is critical for that. That means finalizing trade deals with the UK, ASEAN, and other partners, and importantly, investing in the infrastructure and relationships that help get Canadian goods to market. And finally, we must stop leaving economic growth on the table at home. Removing trade barriers between provinces will boost our competitiveness, improving recognition of licenses, harmonizing standards, and building stronger domestic supply chains. Canada's trade strategy needs to be stronger, smarter, and built for the future. See how our experts are working towards a strong, secure, and sovereign Canada at cdhowe.org.
You're listening to The Amber Mac Show on Canada Talks, Sirius XM 167.